Hi, I'm Eric. I'm back with another video. It's Friday evening here, May 1st. And of course, May 1st is May Day, which is International Workers' Day. And it's interesting because, this May Day was actually created as an American labor holiday by the labor union in the labor movement in the United States. But the people who run the United States didn't want people. They really tried to, what can I say, discourage class consciousness. Let's put it that way. They want to discourage class consciousness, and they didn't want international labor solidarity. So they got rid of May 1st as Labor Day and moved it to September, the first Monday in September. So that's that. Anyway, what I want to talk about is what I call meet the new Cold War, same as the old Cold War. And I'll be showing what you'll do, but when you watch this presentation below, I'll be posting some pictures and videos and things of that nature so that you can get a little more context. But the first thing I'm going to show you is this is a Soviet era poster with it pictures a scale. You have a scale with like this, and on the one hand, on one side of the scale, you have Uncle Sam, you have France's Charles de Gaulle, who was trying to maintain the French colonial system in Vietnam and in Algeria, and even today in Mali. The French were cooking up trouble in Mali, trying to get back control of Mali. So the French have never given up their pretensions to colonial control. But in any case, it shows Francis de Gaulle, and then it shows Churchill, who was the hero of World War II, except that the Soviet Union remembers him as the guy who used poison gas during the post-revolution invasion when Churchill invaded the Soviet Union in 1919. He was actually using chlorine gas. Fortunately, it didn't work, so he stopped doing it. But that was Churchill, and he also used poison gas against Iraqis because, you see, if you're British, you have the inherent understanding that you are genetically superior to other people and therefore entitled to their resources. So there's that, and then there's the last character is what I call the granddad of the surveillance state, namely the first head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. So that's one side of the scale. And on the other side of the scale is the fist of the people. And it's down like that and up like that. And it says, the forces of peace are invincible. So that's an example of the old Cold War. It's like a perfect example of the old Cold War. Now, the new Cold War, I created a couple of AI things here. And the first is a table where Vladimir Putin is talking in rather stern tones with Prince Charles and Donald Trump and Friedrich Merz of Germany and Emmanuel Macron of France. And we'll be talking about what role these people are playing in this new Cold War. Scrolling down further, I have a photo of this is kind of like an updated photo where it says, "Checkpoint Charlie, you are leaving the American sector." This harkens back to the Cold War when the Soviet Union and you had divided Berlin, and there was East Berlin and West Berlin, and East Berlin was under the German Democratic Republic, and West Berlin was the German Federal Republic. And of course, that was the real height of the Cold War in the late 1950s. And it shows a checkpoint with a soldier, and then it shows some armored vehicles with flags of NATO and the United States and England. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I asked the AI creator to change it to a Russian flag from a Soviet flag because the conditions are basically the same. So recently, the King of England visited the United States to congratulate us on kicking his sorry ass out of the United States in in our American Revolution. So he congratulated us, and he says, we have a special relationship, which is it is a special relationship, but I'm not. It's maybe a neurotic relationship, but it is a relationship for sure. But what he did was during this speech in which he talks about our special relationship with the United States, the British relationship with the United States, he calls on the United States and England to support the Ukrainian people who are so courageous. The problem is that these courageous Ukrainians, millions have left the country. A couple of millions have been killed in this war that they initiated, and I'll explain what that's about. And millions are in country hiding from these thugs that are press ganging them to fight in a war that they really don't want to fight. So, what's his name? Lindsey Graham says, we're going to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. How generous of you, how brave of you. And the King Charles is doing the same thing. He's making it as if Ukraine, he was equating Ukraine as if it were a member of NATO. He said that Article 5 is an article of NATO, the NATO Charter, which says that if a country is attacked as a member of NATO, then all the other countries of NATO need to defend it. The problem is that Ukraine is not a part of NATO. It never was a part of NATO. It was originally conceived of as being a neutral country that would not have any kind of alliance like that. And because the West has been, again, this is the Cold War. The West has been using NATO since 1945. They've been manipulating the people, propagandizing them to create this division between Ukrainian people and Russian people, it's a relationship that's been going on for literally centuries. And they've done a good job at in alienating a lot of the Ukrainians to hate Russia from as far as I'm concerned, no really good reason. I have a good friend who lives in Ukraine, and she lives in a city, and she says, this is a Soviet city. She liked the Soviet Union. She likes Russia. She wants Russia to win the war. She doesn't like the government, and she can't say anything because if she does, she will be sent to jail. And she's lucky because she's a woman. If you're a man her age, you could be pulled off the street, shoved into a bus, have a rifle shoved into your hand, sent to the front, where you might not even get food or water, apparently, according to recent news reports. And that's the reason why they are losing, multiples more people dying in that war than are Russians. There's something, I saw something like, I think it was like, the ratio is like 20-1 of Ukrainians being killed. They don't want to fight. This was not a war this is a war that was foisted upon them by a coup government that the United States installed, and along with England. So this is what I'm talking about, is when the Cold War ended, the Russians thought that they were ending the Cold War, but the Cold War never ended. I'll get into that in a little more detail. So after the Second World War, right immediately after the Second World War, the British, who would have been attacked by the Nazis. However, the Germans had this idea to go after Russia, so they didn't. They decided to hold off on an invasion of England, and they attacked the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union crushed the Russian army, the German army. But in gratitude for being saved from an invasion, Churchill created this plan called operation, unthinkable, in which he was going to recruit 100,000 former German army soldiers, Wehrmacht soldiers, and along with American and British soldiers, reinvade the Soviet Union to, quote unquote, finish the job. And fortunately, the British people would have none of that, and they kicked Churchill out of office. So he was the great hero, and immediately they said, "Get out of here. We don't want any more war." So that was so the immediately after World War II, you were seeing the roots of the Cold War starting. And then in 1946, Churchill again gave the speech in Fullerton, Missouri, talking about an iron curtain falling on Europe. And he forgot the fact that in Yalta, there was an agreement where the Soviet Union said, look, we've been invaded multiple times. We really don't like that. And we would like to have a sphere of influence in our area where we will have people who are friendly to us. Is that really so terrible, so different from what our Monroe Doctrine is? I don't see it. But they say, oh, it's an iron curtain. So when the British exert brutal colonial control over a country, that's called white man's burden. And when the Soviet Union tries to protect itself from being invaded, that's called, the Iron Curtain. So you see, this is the double standard that's at play here. The next data point is that General Zhukov was the greatest commander, the greatest Russian general. He was a Marshal Zhukov. He was at the forefront of many of the campaigns, and he saved Stalingrad and Leningrad and so on. And but he marched into Berlin, and he said, "We saved Europe from fascism, and they will never forgive us." So those words proved to be prophetic, as we will see. But following World War II, this is 1945, we had 45 years of relentless propaganda and economic and military pressure against a country that had been decimated. The Soviet Union had been decimated. Many of its factories, fields, and then burned. 27 million people dead. So the country had a serious, obstacles to recovering, and yet it managed within 12 years to fire the first satellite in orbit and the first man in space. So, for a country that was bereft and in dire straits following World War II, they really did an amazing job. But the problem was that the Soviet people were susceptible to Western propaganda. There's a large element of people in Russia who have this kind of soft spot for anything Western, and they believe anything that the West says. And as a result, it was susceptible to a takeover by these liberals who allowed the Soviet Union to be disbanded. So that was what happened with the collapse and dismemberment of the Soviet Union starting in the 1990s. Now in 2000, right at the point where Russia was at the point of being basically disintegrating almost completely, the CIA had instigated a rebellion in southern Russia in the area called Chechnya, but fortunately, the Russian leadership, that is, you could say the Russian deep state, said to Boris Yeltsin, who had collaborated with the West and allowed the West to essentially rip off the Soviet economy. They said, Yeltsin, get out of here. And they chose this guy, this unknown bureaucrat named Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin apparently had a pretty good reputation as a methodical and honest politician, at least according to the one Western source that I know of named Sharon Tennyson, who had met him when he was a bureaucrat in St. Petersburg. She found him to be a very honorable person. So that was interesting. And of course, since then, he has basically brought Russia back from the brink. Now, there are people who oppose his policies, and we'll talk about that. But the bottom line is that Russia's in a lot better position now than it was in 2000. Okay, so that's I want to talk next about the treachery of both George Bush the father, and George Bush the son. George Bush the father was around when the Soviet Union fell, and he pretended to be a honorable diplomat, but behind closed doors, he was saying, we won the Cold War, and we're going to go for the throat. It's basically what they said. And of course, you have the neocons who were desperate to get control of Russia's resources. And you have the British, who have always had it in for Russia, because the British capitalist system depends on stealing other countries' resources. That's what they do. So as I mentioned, they had warned of a Russian attack 3 times, and yet they were the ones who've attacked Russia. Now, finally, in 2007, this is when the new Cold War was starting to heat up. So in 2007, Vladimir Putin gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference, and he warned that Russia was getting tired of this Western aggression, because the West was they were moving NATO. They had agreed not to move NATO's borders 1 inch to the east of Germany, and yet they moved it inexorably right up to Russia's borders. And Putin was saying, please don't do that. Please don't do that. He said to George Bush Jr., you're trashing a nuclear arms control treaty, the ABM treaty. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Bush says, none of your business. So Russia has been dealing with Western hostility from the very earliest days following the end of the Soviet Union. So that's why I say the new Cold War is the same as the old Cold War. I mentioned again in 2004 and in 2014, Ukraine had become independent. It was what we call one of the Soviet Socialist republics. It was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist republics, and it declared independence from the Soviet Union and became Ukraine, independent of the Soviet Union. But there were conditions that it was not going to maintain nuclear weapons. It didn't have control, actually. These were Soviet-controlled weapons, not Ukrainian, which they overlook. And they also agreed to be neutral and not to be part of NATO. And of course, NATO will have none of that, and it has wanted Ukraine to be part of NATO, because if it's part of NATO, then they can say, oh, we need to defend Ukraine from an imminent Russian invasion, which allows us to put nuclear missiles 5 minutes from Moscow. And Russia's supposed to put up with that. In 1962, the United States had this idea of putting Turkish missiles in Turkey, and the Soviet Union decided to put some missiles in Cuba. And the funny thing is, the United States really didn't like that. But it's okay for the United States to ring Russia with all kinds of military bases and weapons and nuclear missiles and nuclear armaments in Germany and Turkey and Italy and Netherlands and countries like that. It's okay for the United States to do that, but heaven forbid that Russia should complain about it, much less do anything to counteract it, like maybe putting missiles back in Cuba or maybe in Venezuela or whatever. Okay, so that's that. But the question is that after the Maidan coup in 2014, I think Russia understood, and this is a question. Did Russia act out of weakness, out of naivete? What was it that caused them to allow that coup to happen in 2014? In Belarus, there was another attempt later on, and in Kazakhstan, there was an attempt later on, and Russia intervened to prevent that from happening. to be further NATO encroachment. But they did allow the coup in 2014 to happen with terrible consequences. So finally, by 2022, following 8 years of low-level war by the Kiev fascist government controlled by the United States and the British, who had been attacking people in eastern Ukraine with rockets and raids, torturing people and atrocities and so on and so forth, killed several thousands of people. In March of 2022, the level of artillery strikes on this eastern part of Ukraine that had been rebelling had reached such a level that finally the Communist Party of the Russian Federation put forth a resolution in the Duma, which said we need to recognize this area of Ukraine, which is Russian speaking. They're ethnic Russian. They don't want to be part of Ukraine. They've been persecuted by these people for a couple of decades, and they've been shelled by these people. And we have to grant them independence, and we have to protect them. So that was the immediate cause of the current war situation. Now, the thing is that the question arises. The war has been going on for 4 years now, and there's a kind of a controversy. And the controversy is between those who feel that the war has been going on for too long, it's been going very slowly, and is it because Putin has been overcautious and does not want to upset the situation too much? He doesn't want full mobilization, for example. Or is it that, is he waging a war of attrition where he's going much more slowly, destroying the Ukrainian army, which is a goal of the military operation, the special military operation, but he didn't want to kind of shock NATO into having a full NATO response. So there's a question of what was he doing there? Now, over the centuries of proximity to a European predator, and because Russia has been invaded by by European powers, by Hitler in World War II, they're being attacked as we speak with Western missiles, Western-made missiles attacking Russia right now. And by rights, you'd think that Russia would say, "Fine, you want to send a British Storm Shadow missile here? Why don't we'll attack the British? Why not? They're attacking us. We'll attack them." They haven't been doing that. But the point is that Russia has been invaded. Not just now, but in World War II, and under Napoleon, and after the Revolution, Napoleon invaded. The Poles have invaded, the Swedish have invaded. So Russia has been invaded many, many times. And so the Europeans have this, it seems like a habitual, or can we say even genetic, obsession with Russia and needing to attack Russia. So there are now reports that Europe is saying that they're planning on a war in 2030, but by that time, all their governments of Europe will probably have changed. So, the words of the rabid militarist Boris Pistorius, he's the German defense minister, quote unquote defense minister, are much closer to reality. At the end of last year, he totally amazed Germans by saying that perhaps by the summer of 2025 would be their last peaceful summer. He said that in 2025. Here we are in 2026. So I'm going to be moving forward to cite some articles that are coming forward now that are talking about this point, and why I say that we are formally in a real Cold War, and it's veering into hot. So this is an article that was printed on a Russian website, and I'm quoting, this is the English translation of it. It says, it's characteristic that after a couple of months, Germany slowly passed a law prohibiting German men from leaving the country without notifying the military registration and enlistment office. After the public screamed, the government responded that the law was suspended for now, but could be turned on at any time. However, for it to work, the government in Germany will have to actually close the borders to travel. Is that an iron curtain or what? Only it's an iron curtain against the people in the West. Only men with a certificate from the military registration and enlistment office will be released. What will this be if not preparation for full mobilization? And there's a picture here of Friedrich Merz, who was criticized for this. But as of April 14th, the article continues, the frantic pace of European military development is also thought-provoking. Volkswagen factories are switching to the production of military equipment from weapons. The cars that Volkswagen used to make are not competitive with Chinese ones, and they're going to go out of business. So they say, hey, let's make tanks instead of guns, instead of cars. And the German government says, hey, that's a great idea. So EU countries, one after the other, are signing up for the production of drones for the Ukrainian armed forces. And Oslo, Norway, has just concluded a corresponding agreement with Kiev. Compulsory conscription has returned. Not only men, but also women are called up to arms. Large-scale NATO exercises are being held near Russian borders. And already in the beginning of summer, French pilots will simulate nuclear strikes on St. Petersburg. All this costs a lot of money, the article continues, but most European countries are already on the verge of bankruptcy. The idea of boosting your economy by boosting in the military-industrial complex looks completely unrealistic. This is as stupid as Baron Munchausen trying to pull himself out of the swamp by the hair. So that is an article from a Russian author about the situation in Europe and their attitude towards Russia. Now I'm going to be talking about two speeches that one is by Medvedev, who is the deputy head of the National Security Council in the Russian Federation, and by Putin. So he's kind of like number two in Russia, and Putin is number one, obviously. So Putin had a conversation with Donald Trump recently. So the foreign minister of Iran goes to Moscow, and it seems as though Russia and Iran are going to back each other, because Russia knows that if Iran falls, it's going to fall to a very hostile regime right on Russia's border, and they can't allow that to happen. So, so after Putin talked with Araghchi from Iran, Putin called Trump, and I'm saying, is Putin offering a bitter pill inside of a marshmallow? So Putin had a very cordial hour and a half conversation with Trump, in which he talked about future economic cooperation. And yes, Zelensky's kind of a bad guy, and they agreed on a lot of stuff. But Putin, in the middle of this very polite conversation, had this to say. And this is quoting from an article from TASS, the Russian news agency. The president of Russia drew attention to the inevitable and extremely detrimental consequences, not only for Iran and its neighbors, but also for the entire international community. If the United States and Israel once again resort to force, and of course, the option of a ground operation on Iranian territory is completely unacceptable and dangerous. That's President Putin speaking. Trump apparently agreed with him, but I'm going to explain what that means in a second. Now, Medvedev, who's the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, is more blunt. He recently spoke at a conference, and this is what some of the things that he had to say. He said the development of relations with Western countries confirmed that the Russian Emperor Alexander III is right in saying that Russia has only two allies, the army and the navy. We looked at our relations with our neighbors, with the Western world through rose-colored glasses in the past. The development of events refuted both some of my illusions and the illusions of a huge number of people in our country. In 2011, he was the president of Russia. He was in the position that Putin is in, and he trusted the United States when there was this problem in Libya, and he did not veto a UN resolution which would have prohibited the United States from creating a no-fly zone over Libya. He didn't veto that resolution, and as a result, the United States basically used that UN resolution to destroy Libya. And I think this is what turned Medvedev to the point of view that he has now, which is a much stronger point of view, much more hardline point of view. So he says, the development of events refuted both some of my illusions and the illusions of a huge number of people in our country. Alexander III was right with his well-known words about the fact that Russia has only two allies, and you remember very well who those allies are, the army and the navy. The second thing, he says, is that the Europeans wish the death of the Russian state. This has become the main trend in the politics of the West, and especially Europe. They don't understand a lot of what we say. They don't want to hear us. And frankly speaking, they want the death of our state. And from everything that I can hear coming out of the mouths of the Western politicians, that seems to be a fact. He goes on to say, the conflict between Russia and the West wears existential character. Our conflict with the Western world today is existential. That is, it is a matter of existence. And unfortunately, I have no illusions right now about what's next. European leaders every day, they repeat, it is unclear where the mantra came from that war with Russia is inevitable. What do the Europeans say? War with Russia is inevitable. I don't know where they got it from, but it's a mantra. This is said every day. The Russians will definitely attack us. Just as the British say, they're going to attack us. They're going to attack us. They've never attacked England, ever. The only time they've attacked Europe is when Europe attacked Russia. So when the French came in and burned Moscow to the ground, the Russians fought their way back and entered Paris. And when the Germans fought Russia in the Second World War, the Russians fought back and they went back into Berlin. And then the Europeans will say, you invaded us. Well, yeah, if you start a fight, be sorry if things don't work out the way you wanted to. You wanted to destroy Russia and you lost. And you're going to try it again, and you better watch out. That's basically what Medvedev is saying. So he says, not in any of the speeches of Russian political figure, not in any of the statements, not in any of the documents that Russia accepted, it doesn't say there's a need for conflicts with Europe. You have to recall that the Europeans had perfectly fine agreements with Russia to deliver gas and oil to Europe. And it started during the Soviet Union time. It continued on. And then at some point they get into their head, Russia's our enemy and we can't allow them to sell us our oil, even though it's a good deal for us. We'd rather pay 2 or 3 times as much for unreliable and more expensive American oil because we feel freer that way than getting a better deal from the Russians. This is how they think. This is why I say there's some kind of psychological problem with these people in Europe. In Russia, there's no aggressive designs toward Europe. What does Russia need with Europe? It doesn't have any resources. The reason why the Europeans invade Russia is because Russia has resources. Europe does not have resources. That is the reason why they engaged in colonialism for 200 or 300 years. They built up a military so they could go into Africa, in China, and in Latin America, and Southeast Asia, all in the search of resources. And they became quite rich by stealing people's resources. And slowly but surely, those people have managed to extricate themselves from the clutches of Europe. And that is what the current war is about. It's a world war between former colonial powers who are clinging to the notion of their former glory, and the rest of the world, which is saying we've had enough. Dozens of Western countries, they accept not a hybrid, but a direct participation in the conflict with Russia. Our enemy is not only Bandera's Ukraine, he's saying. These, as you know, are dozens of Western countries that are directly involved in the war with our country. I emphasize direct. This is Medvedev saying this. Not hybrid, but direct participation when they give targets for strikes, when they supply various types of weapons, when in fact they direct the actions of our enemies. Now, at the head of the European Union, they are standing idiots. He calls them idiots who are destroying what has been built for decades. And now Europe, the European Union, is led by idiots, just idiots who themselves are destroying what has been done in the decades since the European Union was transformed from a coal and steel union into a modern European Union, which has become more and more oppressive and centralized in its control and authority over its member states. Now, I'm going to conclude here with something, because I just saw an interview with Jeffrey Sachs, who's a very famous economist. He's a development economist, and he specializes in sustainable development. And he was just on Tucker Carlson's show, and he was giving a long discussion about the current situation. And he frankly says that he is basically saying what Medvedev is saying, that the West has got it in for Russia. They want to have a war, and there's a high possibility of a nuclear war, because the people who are running the United States and Europe are warmongers. And he doesn't want any part of it, but that's where we are. So that's why I say that this old Cold War has morphed into a new Cold War, and it's a very dangerous situation. And the problem is, I was just talking with some friends of mine last night, and I am planning to go to Russia within a few days and spend about a month there. And people ask, well, why would I go there? Well, it's because my European family, most of them were killed by the Nazis in World War II, and it was the Soviet Union that saved the world from fascism. And during World War II, there was a movie made by the former ambassador to the Soviet Union, Joseph Davies, who was sent to the Soviet Union by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was tasked with finding out what is going on with the Soviet Union. And he said that, and he gives an introduction. This is the guy who actually, it's a movie about this guy, but the actual person, Joseph M. Davy, gives an introduction in which he says, we really need to support the Soviet Union, because if we don't, and the Germans take over Asia from Europe, and the Japanese take over Asia from China and that end, then they will control the world, and we in America will be next on the target list. So it is important for us to back the Soviet Union. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had a good relationship with Joseph Stalin, because both of them shared this idea that there should not be any more colonies. And that was the reason why Churchill hated both of them and probably had both of them assassinated. There's evidence of that. So we are in a new Cold War, and people, thoughtful people, both in Russia and in the United States, and these are economists like Jeffrey Sachs, and even military people like Douglas McGregor and Tony Aguilar, people of that nature. These are military people. They have their heads screwed on straight, and they're saying we are in a Cold War, and it's dangerous, and it could go hot, and we have to be very careful. And so I was talking with my friends, and I said, I'm going there. And they said, gee, what we hear is I said, I don't remember the adjective that they use, but I said, whatever adjective you're using, it's a euphemism, because what the Western people are pumped up with is this Hollywood version of the evil empire, the evil Russians, the evil Soviet Union. And I think it's just very unfair, and it's completely inaccurate. So I feel that it's important for me to go there as a witness. And I know that there are other Americans who are going to Russia and going there as witnesses to hear what the Russian people have to say. So that's what I've got to say here. And this may be, I'll try to do something before I leave. I'm leaving on Monday. It is Friday evening. Maybe I'll put out one more video before I leave. But in case I don't, please, support my channel. Please give me a like or a share, or heaven forbid, even a donation. Airfares and all that stuff does cost money. So, of course, then maybe you'll be accused of, some terrible crime. I don't know. But anyway, seriously, please do support my channel, and please share these ideas with people, because we have to raise the consciousness of the people in the United States, realize that we do not have enemies. Iran was never our enemy. Russia was not our enemy. China is not our enemy. And we need to learn to get along with everybody instead of this obsessive desire for control. So that's what it's really all about. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk with you again soon.